Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. It is one of my passions, and I think it's an important model to consider as we're kind of coming out of this pandemic and looking at, what are some things we can do to make some changes. So hopefully I will be able to give you some inspiration or some ideas that can help you as you move forward. So here are the things I'm going to cover today. What is a registered apprenticeship program? What makes it different from a regular apprenticeship program? What is the national structure of an apprenticeship program? Why adopt a registered apprenticeship program? Why would you even consider going in this direction? What makes a good employer candidate for the program? What are the components of a registered apprenticeship program? What are the qualities of a successful apprenticeship candidate? So as you're looking at individuals that you would want to bring into your program, what do those people look like? There's some really key indicators of that. What are some of the barriers to successful apprenticeship programs? That's important. We'll do some myth busting, and then talk about a registered apprenticeship sponsorship, how to start the process, and of course the role of the ATR and the Florida Department of Education. So what is a registered apprenticeship program? It's employer-driven, first and foremost. It is developed directly out of your company and of your company's needs. It's a quality assurance system. I always emphasize the system part because it's not an apprenticeship program. It's not like an internship. When you take it on, you're looking at your entire business model from start to finish and saying, how do we integrate this in? As a matter of fact, I've done some research, and about 30% of employers fail to connect the success and failure of their new hires to their operating budget. I mean, that's pretty good data, and I even think it's a little higher than that. That was reported in the Harvard Business Review. And so for that reason, it is a system of looking at how do you onboard your talent. It's uniformly accepted industry and occupational standards. So the way that you decide that you're going to train are occupational standards that cross over and then are accepted in your industry. It's structured on the job training. So it's not just an onboarding, right? So the onboarding is you do the 8 weeks, maybe get your active shooter, your HR, other HR functions, sexual harassment, maybe some IT security thrown in there, but you're really looking at long-term, how are we going to do this on-the-job training? There's supplemental instruction, so that supplemental instruction can be tailored to your company. So let's say you're an IT company and you're hiring IT, your apprenticeship program is a help desk, and you have maybe some sensitive customers, maybe it's healthcare. And so part of that related instruction might be some really good, deep communication skills, de-escalating when customers contact the help desk and are maybe having some issues in addition to maybe some things that are going on with them. And then there's a monetary reward schedule. So we get into that in a little bit deeper as we look at the return on investment. But basically, as they're learning, they're earning. And at the end of the day, it's also approved and accredited by a governmental agency. And that's what makes it a registered program. It is a gold standard. So nationally, we started getting into apprenticeships shortly after, about 1940s, when they did the Fair Standard Labor Act. And we started to see an increase in them as our country was rebuilding. We were looking at construction and trades. So the Department of Labor made adopted the apprenticeship model through some statutes. And it gave the states an opportunity to decide whether they wanted to be part of an OA office, which is Office of Apprenticeship, or if the state wanted to maintain some more local control. So what you see up here is that it's pretty much half and half between those states that have Office of Apprenticeship and report directly to the Department of Labor, and those that report to their state apprenticeship office. And as you can see here in the state of Florida, we are an SAA state. What that means basically is the difference is, first and foremost, you have local folk that are connected. And I'll talk a little bit more about those. Those are our ATRs. You also can create articulations locally to your school systems. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more as well. And it used to be that you could only apply for your local workforce board funds, but as I understand it, there's been a change. And now that OAs can operate in a state, they can also access those funds. So why adopt a registered apprenticeship program? Well, first and foremost, as I mentioned, the success or the failure of your new hires connects right to your operational budget. When I talk to HR folks, they get that immediately because they're the ones that are generating the paperwork and the training work for those new hires. So if you make a poor hire, it's going to take a little bit of time to recoup. An apprenticeship program minimizes the risk in that area. It also shortens the time for the return on investment for the new hire. So research kind of shows us that it takes about 18 months to really get that return on investment of the new hire. By the time they've gone through your training, they've acclimated to your culture, and so now they're ready. So about 18 months, you're like, okay, we're really beginning to see that there is this person we put all this money and effort into, we're getting our return on investment. But what an apprenticeship program does is it fast tracks that. So you get a quicker return on investment than a standard hire. It engages productive interaction between current employees and the new hire. So many of you might remember when you were first hired onto a company and they showed you around and said, okay, this is Bill and this is Mike and this is Mary and this is Jeanette, and you're trying to remember everybody's names, and there's the joke, oh, there'll be a quiz after this, right? Well, in an apprenticeship program, you develop a mentorship position, and that mentorship is key to helping that apprentice navigate through their on-the-job training and connect their related instruction to that position. So you can imagine having a mentor or a journey worker when you start your job gives you that access, and it really engages those employees almost immediately into the new hire and helps those relationships to form. It increases the productivity by extending the OJT beyond the traditional onboarding process. So again, when we think about onboarding, sometimes it's very quick, right? It's here's the first 4 weeks, boom, you got it, and move forward. But, you know, we listen to Malcolm Gladwell, who tells us it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in anything, and that's a huge gap. So you're hiring someone with the hopes of making them be a very productive employee in your business. So how do you get that to happen? And oftentimes folks will sort of blunder around. I always say my best joke is when I first started my first job, when I came out of college, I was the coordinator for an adult education program at a community college up in Chicago. And they were all excited that they hired me. And, you know, my new boss showed me to my office and said, you know, there's the ladies that'll help you make it work. And I remember sitting in the office going, oh my God, what do I do? And I opened up the drawer and I separated the big paper clips from the small paper clips for like the first, you know, hour as I was trying to think about, okay, I got to come up with a plan here. So it really gets you to be productive because obviously I wasn't very productive that day, right? It improves the quality of your workforce culture. So it really gets you, and again, going back to that system, you're looking at your workforce culture and you're really developing it and you're using the registered program to do just that. So I might say here that probably the one company that does that really well, right here in the state of Florida, they're not a registered apprenticeship program for their on the ground staff, but many of their staff in various areas do have an apprenticeship program that's not registered, and that is Walt Disney. So Disney really manages to really acclimate their new hires into a real culture that they can extend through. It retains the company product, service, process knowledge. So especially with startups, you've gone through a lot of work. You've really, you've had your mistakes, you've corrected things, you've done your assessments, and that information is really important, right? Because if you don't hold on to it, you sort of can make those same mistakes again. And you want your new employees to know how far you've come. And then, of course, we all remember that one employee we had who were like, please don't retire. You know where everything is at. So it's important to maintain that knowledge. It reduces turnover. So if you look at 1 through 6, you can see that all of those items are geared towards a really intentional onboarding of that employee. And of course, if you do that really well, you're going to reduce your turnover. And ultimately, if you reduce your turnover, if you have consistency, regardless if you are providing a product or a service, you're going to increase consumer confidence, right? Because they're going to come back and it's going to be consistent and they're going to know what to expect. So what makes a good employer candidate? I would like to tell you that this information has been accumulated over a number of years. Our oldest apprenticeship program here in the state of Florida was started in 1945. Our ATRs that are currently in those positions have been a part of making sure that those programs run smoothly, offering technical assistance. And what they came up with was a list of what are the things that make for a successful employer. Who's a good candidate for this? So it's an employer who has a true concern about training and maintaining a skilled workforce, is willing to adhere to all the rules and regulations. Now that sounds kind of overwhelming, doesn't it? But here's the deal. Having worked on a number of grants in my own life, I know that there were some places when I left, the grant was built on me. And when I left, the program sort of waffled a little bit because it wasn't integrated into a system. So setting things up in rules and regulations, which says, here's the type of training, here's the on-the-job training we're going to do, here's the related instruction, we've set up a system. So my people in healthcare get this really quick because they know if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Is not primarily seeking funds or grants. Those are the cherries on top. I always tell employers, are you going to be hiring this person anyway? And they say yes. And I say, okay, so let's build the program. And once the program is built and it's registered, then as you hire, you can go to your local workforce board and say, here's a position, here's the apprenticeship, here's what we're hiring. Can you help us with that? What kind of dollars do you have? If you're pulling in people that are currently working in your company, they would be considered incumbent workers. That would allow for some funding for those positions. But you're not primarily seeking that. It's the charity, right? It's not looking for cheap or short-term labor needs. So you're not looking, we got to fill these positions quick. I've been working with healthcare providers. There's such a shortage of CNA right now. And we've had some really honest conversations about prior to COVID, they were just like, do you have a CNA? Come on, apply. But now that we're they're looking at shifting to an apprenticeship program, they're marketing that as an apprenticeship program. So there's a little bit of teeth in it, and they're developing career pathways. Is concerned about the loss of company knowledge. Again, I go back to, we all got that one person in our office that knows everything. And when they announce that they're retiring, we kind of get that little, pit in our stomach going, no, you can't. We have to brain dump you first before you leave the building. So an apprenticeship is that way of connecting up mentors and keeping that information in-house and getting it to have a legacy to it. Understands that the apprenticeship is a long-term commitment. Again, as I mentioned, 1945 is when our oldest one was there, and they're doing quite well. And then embraces the organizational culture of apprenticeship. It's not an appendage program, it's a paradigm shift. And that, I think, is the most important thing that I can tell employers. If one person just wants the program, typically we have a conversation, a couple weeks later, I don't hear from them again. It's when I get that call back and they say, hey, now can you talk to our HR person as well? Can you talk to the president or the director? So once I start to get to those folks and they start to realize that this is a system change, is when we begin to see that this is going to work for them. And it may not. So what are the components? Again, I mentioned the on-the-job training. It's a very intentional, structured piece, and there's a number of individuals that can help you with that. Then there's the on-the-job training, the related instruction, the rewards for skills gained, and it culminates in an occupational credential. So let's talk about the on-the-job training models. Prior to 2008 was when President Obama signed the New Deal for the Department of Labor, announcing that there would be an expansion of apprenticeships in terms of industry. Prior to that, it was mostly construction and trade. Well, if you're in construction and trade, you know that the hours, if someone's going to put a roof on your house, you want to make sure they're going to do it for 8,000 hours, right? It's like the Malcolm Gladwell thing, 10,000 hours makes an expert. Here in Florida, we want our roofs to stay on and intact. So we like those roofers to have a lot of hours under their belt in nailing those roofs down. But as we moved into new industries, we saw that there was a need to be a little bit more flexible. So I want to talk about the competency base. So things like IT, healthcare, manufacturing, they decided, people can get things a little bit quicker. Can we fast track it? And the idea is, yes, you can. You still have to have a minimum of 2,000 hours, which is 1 year. But as they meet those competencies, their mentor will sign off on them and they can move forward. The hybrid is a little bit between that competency and that hourly. So it's sort of bookended. So I always explain that would be like a phlebotomist. So the phlebotomist knows how to stick a needle and draw blood, right? But you want to make sure that they can do it consistently, but over a variety of different patients. So you might have children, you might have elderly, you might have folks with rolling veins. So you want to bookend it and maybe say, okay, 80 to 100 hours is the time frame we're going to bookend that competency, to make sure that there's a variety of different patients that they're working with. The related instruction also has become more flexible. So it is recommended that it's 144 hours a year. It can be a little bit less. It used to be, that was it, 144. It can be front loaded. So you could have a situation where they go through their related instruction first. It can be segmented. There's companies that are around. I know there was a company in Chicago when I was visiting a couple years ago, and it was manufacturing. So they would do 1 month of on-the-job training, and then they would take 2 weeks off to get their related instruction, and then another month on. Or it could be articulated, which means they may have done some work in the past and had some schooling or education, and it gets articulated right into the program. It can be done at an educational institution, a college, a vocational school. It can be done in-house by the company themselves, or it can be done online. And it can be either clock or credit hour. The most important thing is that the apprentice cannot be charged. The idea here is that an apprenticeship gives somebody the ability to go through the training and the education with no debt at the end. So the mentor and the journey person, that is the expert craftsman. That is the person that knows the position well and is the one that is overseeing the apprenticeship. There's somebody who has mastered the skills, knowledge, abilities, and competencies it takes to do that job. And they're trained and compensated to mentor that apprentice. I think that's probably the most important thing. When I first started doing this, I had a company that failed to tell the mentors who showed up on Monday that they were in fact mentors for apprentices. Well, you can imagine that was not met with very happy faces. It's like, yes, and what else do you want me to do? And I got to sign off on what? So yeah, so you really want to make sure that you're compensating that person, taking something off and training them, giving them the appropriate tools to do the job. So I want to get to the rewards for skill gain pieces. So if you look at this, you can see down here, the apprenticeship starts at a lower pay scale because they don't have the experience. So if you're hiring for experience, you're hiring at that top level. The apprentice gets a benchmark which the employer determines as they go through their competencies, they will get a raise, and then they will get a raise when they get to the end. So as they're learning, they're earning. This is really important when you hire those apprentices to give them a whole background on what it is that they're doing. If we look at the experienced person, you're not putting any money, you're just putting money out. So you're not growing them. So here is the investment on the lower half of the triangle. That's the investment that you're putting into that employee. And that's the return on investment that you're getting. Because you're paying less money up front, you may be adding to their related technical instruction, but ultimately you're not bringing someone in at top dollar. So what makes a successful apprenticeship candidate? It's someone that's not just looking for a job, but they're looking for a career pathway. This is really important when we start looking at those non-traditional apprenticeship programs, because ultimately you want, especially for those low-paying entry-level ones, as I mentioned, like a CNA, they're coming in making probably not a lot of money, and if you really want to grow that employee, you want to help build a pipeline, you really have to bring them through the process. And you need to give them something that they could do at the end. Maybe after being a CNA for 2 years, one of the things you've wrapped into their on-the-job training is the ability to go into the kitchen and work with the nutritional staff. Maybe it's the ability to work, you can see what an LPN does. Maybe it's the ability to work with a physical therapist. So they're getting a education so they know, well, I'm going to do this for about 18 months, and then I'm going to go back to school, and I want to get into those other positions. Now you're building a pipeline because you're bringing people through, and that's the key to retention. They're humble and understands the value of a mentor. So that is on the onus, I think, of the company to kind of help them understand that they're getting a mentor and what that mentor is going to do. Everyone should have a mentor. I have mentors. I still have mentors in my life. I always promote, you've got to have a mentor, find a mentor. Is committed to the full apprenticeship timeframe. Later on, Tom's going to come up and talk about camp skills, and they've done a really good job with sort of outlining when he brings on his apprentice, here's what we're going to do for you, here's the expectation, and here's how long it's going to take you to do that. Understands that there's less financial compensation at the beginning, but it's going to increase. So you may be coming in at a lower rate of pay, but you don't know anything at this point. But you're going to grow into this position, and we're going to compensate you as you learn. It's to take constructive criticism. Now, again, these items were put together by our ATRs, so they have watched those apprentices that have come through and have successfully completed programs. So really having a good conversation with those employees when they're coming on board to understand we're not criticizing you, we're giving you feedback, and we want you to grow. Is willing to continue learning even when they've completed the apprenticeship program. And again, I want to maybe address anyone that's in human services, you generally see that, or healthcare. They're coming in at a low rate, but they're going to be moving through, and they're going to be constantly learning. So what are the barriers to a registered apprenticeship program? I think it's important to know what your barriers are going into something so that you can compensate for them. So one of them is buy-in from the organization is less than 100%. You have to have 100% buy-in. Your entire organization has to commit to this. They have to know, because there's going to be people coming in that are less than what you might usually hire. You're going to have expectations, you're going to do mentorships. There's a great program that I worked with up in Chicago. Again, it wasn't registered, but they've been doing a really good job developing mentors and engaging their whole company in the process of developing apprenticeships. Their mentors, their other employees that were the mentors actually decided that they wanted to develop training for mentors. So the owner said, yeah, go ahead. So they got together and they sat down and they came up with a training program for themselves, and they were very excited about it. The program, 100% dependent on outside funding sources. If you're building a program that's 100% dependent on outside funding sources, then when those funding sources dry up, you're going to lose your program. So it's important to remember, we want this to last. This is a long haul, long-term solution. This is not a short-term solution. The lack of mentor, journey worker training or compensation. So this information came to me by some research. I looked internationally. I looked at what was going on in Europe. I looked at what was going on in specifically Germany, England, Ireland, Canada. I looked at, and even in our own United States. What were some of the issues that were barriers to completion for the apprentices? And one of them was cited was that the mentor or journey worker really wasn't doing the best that they could. And so it hurt that relationship. And so that individual wind up, that's why they said they quit. This is especially important as we head into the idea that a lot of companies want to increase their diversity. We've heard a lot of that in the last year, and we know a lot of companies put money aside specifically so that they could target populations that they would not normally are reflected in their workplace. So making sure that those journey workers and mentors are trained in things like unconscious bias is really important, because something that could be said that they didn't even think about, but now they're working with someone that is other or different than them, can really sink a program. Restricted related instruction learning modalities. So everybody learns differently. And when we create the related instruction, we were usually doing it face-to-face in the past. So if an instructor was in a classroom and they were teaching, they could sort of gauge from the look on people's faces, if people were getting it or not, and sort of, adapt it so that that person would get the information. As we move into more online work, we may have some issues there. So really keeping in mind, if you have a local college, state college that you're affiliated with, or a technical college, making sure that you have those pieces in place to attract those candidates, but also to give them the opportunity to get tutoring if they need to. And then lack of options for a career pathway in the industry. So apprenticeship programs that are being developed, and it's that in itself, again, I go back to like a CNA or a CCMA, those shouldn't be the end, because you will lose them eventually. People want to be able to form a pathway. And remember, it's a system, not just a program. I want to go through some common myths real quick. Apprenticeship is a limited training program for large employers and only for construction and trades. Again, in 2008, President Obama had a game changer here, because now we have healthcare, manufacturing, construction, hospitality and tourism, logistics and trade, IT, and energy. And those are becoming, the government is putting a lot of money to getting intermediaries in these areas to kind of help promote these types of apprenticeships in these industries. It's only for non-college bound individuals. So I come from Chicago, which is like the heart of Unionville. Everybody in my family was a steel worker, a police, so everybody was part of a union. My brother was a pipe fitter, and he didn't go to college, so that was kind of what people did. They went into apprenticeships, but that's not the case anymore because it's a career path. It's not an either or path. We're really starting to see that this was a model that has really become useful and is really being applied to other industries. So to give you an example of that, we now have a resident registered nurse apprenticeship program. In order to be a nurse, you have to pass the boards, right? But we were seeing a situation that's happening nationally that nurses would go through all that hard work of nursing school, they would graduate, they would pass their boards, they would go to the hospital where they would be employed, and within 6 months they were burning out. And so what hospitals recognized is that we need to have not just an onboarding, but a full on-the-job training to really acclimate these candidates, these employees into their business. So to that end, Trumont in our state has taken that on, and they're working with Lakeland Hospital. I believe they put 147 nurses through the program, and the retention is amazing. Those people that are going into that profession, they've documented their abilities to be able to recognize things immediately or quicker than they would if they were just coming out of school. So it's almost like an education, transition of education to workforce. So that can be done, right? The federal or state government will tell you who to employ, what to do, right? Because we're the ones that's registering your program. Well, that's not true at all. All we do is it's an employer driven. All we do is you tell us what you're going to do. We make sure that those are industry-based standards, right? We register you. You get to decide who you're going to hire, how much you're going to pay, when you're going to fire, if you're going to fire them, and you manage your program. We just come in and say, are you doing what you said you're going to do? And if you say yes, you go, all right. If you say no, we say, would you like to change something? Apprenticeship programs are only for unions, and again, not at all. Unions knew the value of that program last century, and they utilized it to really grow strong workforce that helped to create the infrastructure for many of our cities and towns and roads here. So using that model, we're now applying it to other. Yeah, you can just get that. Thanks. That's my timer. A registered apprenticeship sponsor. So who could be a sponsor and what is a sponsor? A sponsor is accountable for the administration of all aspects of the program. They register the apprentices. When the apprentice is finished, they submit the paperwork to the state so that those individuals could get their certificate. They make sure that everything is going as planned, if that's in those standards that were approved. When our ATRs come out to meet with the program, they're going to meet with the sponsor. They're going to want to see where all that paperwork has been kept. So who could be a sponsor? It could be a single employer. It could be a trade association, a group of employers. I'm trying to get IT companies to buy into this one, because this could really work for them. So if you got a group of small IT employers, they could really work together. A local workforce board. We have a couple of career sources in the state that are sponsors. An educational institution. We have a number of those that are growing: St. Pete College, Broward College, Miami-Dade. So there's a number of those. A community or faith-based organization, joint labor management, or any other approved entity may choose to sponsor. So in order to be a sponsor, you have to have an apprenticeship. So I always compare it to being a Christmas tree. In order to be a Christmas, you're just an evergreen, but once you have an ornament, you're a full-fledged Christmas tree. So with a sponsorship, it's the same thing. You have to have that one program, and then you could add different programs to it. So maybe, for instance, with a school, they could have an IT apprenticeship. They're working with an IT employer, then maybe they bring on a manufacturing employer. So you have to have an employer. So let's look at it as an employer. Are you hiring for potential or are you hiring for expertise? So I know there's been a lot of discussion amongst employers trying to find good help these days. Just coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that I've been recommending is if you market it as an apprenticeship, so you have an apprenticeship entry-level IT help desk, and then you have an IT help desk. So as someone who's looking for a job, I'm going to see that apprenticeship, and it's going to carry a little bit different weight. I want to know what that is. As an employer that's running that IT apprenticeship, you get to create your qualifications. So what I have seen happen is those programs with those apprenticeships are attracting a different type of talent. So let's say you want to do this. How do you start? First and foremost, define your challenge. What position is really affecting your business and your budget? What's the one that's really, every time you hire them, they go away and you're like back to square one. Assess your resources. What kind of resources do you have internally? What kind of time do you have? This has been critical for the nursing because they're constantly in chaos. So when Trumont speaks to the hospitals, they'll address that and say, look, we can help you and cut down on that. So what are your human resources, your training, and what kind of dollars? There's help out there if you're lacking those resources. Develop the pathway, create an organizational strategic plan to have that pipeline of talent. Again, it's not a quick fix. It's not an appendage. It's not an internship. It is a paradigm shift. Contact the Florida Department of Education. So engage an outreach specialist, so you can call me, or an ATR to answer any questions you might have, and we'll begin to help you write the standards. There's also intermediaries out there that can help you do that as well. And we can address that a little bit later, and then you're going to develop your standards, and we're going to get you registered. So I talked about the ATRs. This gives you an idea. There's 9 regions in the state. So you are in Lisa Boyette, who could not be here today, but you are in Region 4. So she's the person that is going to be your apprenticeship training representative. And what they do is they register your program, they help with your compliance, the assessment, and they provide you as a technical assistant. So in closing, it's a quality assurance system. With a great return on investment. It's employer driven, you have registered standards, and you're hiring for potential. And I think that's the key here. So you're hiring potential, not experience, and we're here to help you. And with that, I open up to questions. Yes.
Susan, thanks a lot. I mean, I really learned a lot today, and definitely like to spend a little more time with you. Oh, can I get a mic? Anyway, thank you. Couple of things in terms of data. I'd be very interested in any kind of data about return on investment for an apprentice versus non-apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
That's something, the real hard numbers. We're in the manufacturing business. We work with manufacturers, and I'd love to be able to present them with some data. We know they're all struggling out there to hire people, and apprenticeship, I know, is an answer for them. So that would be helpful. And also any other data in terms of sustainability. I know that somewhere around 90+% of new employees that are hired on as apprentices stay for at least the term of the apprenticeship program. Which depends on, in our end, it could be 2 years, almost 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I realize that if you get somebody over a year, chances are they're going to stick around. But I don't know if you have any data about how long they would stay after.
Yeah, there's some national data, and I could send you the papers on those that talk about it. I don't want to misquote the number, but it's really high. I will tell you that individually different industries have been taking this on in regards to their own industries. So I just saw the white paper for the resident nursing program outlining what the what the outcomes were prior to their program and what they are now that the program is in place. My guess is that your national groups might be keeping that on your specific industry, but I will definitely, I have your card and I'll make sure you get the other information that has the overall. I think overall, it's interesting because any of the data that I've seen overall has been older data. The more, I think now that we have different industries coming on board, we're seeing intermediaries like Trumont that are saying, we need to really help sell this. And you're right, in order to sell that, you want to see what it is. When I look at the data from the Harvard Business Review that talked about the 30%, what they were essentially saying is for individual businesses, they're not even keeping that data prior to going into an apprenticeship program. And I think that's where the conversation has to start, saying, let's look at over the last 5 years, that position that we've had a really difficult time hiring. How many hires have we done in 5 years or just in 3 years? How many have failed? What are the reasons why they failed? And what is the cost then to our bottom line? And so that's really an individual business piece. We can look at the big, like you said, we can look at the big data, but I think it's going to vary for each individual industry and each individual employer. That good answer?
Yeah. And just one more thing, I was thinking about companies that are in manufacturing that would market, because everybody's got ads out for these.
Right.
All over the place. I haven't seen any ads where it says we have an apprenticeship program. So I think that's a great idea to maybe talk to our customers about if they were to roll that in. If you have anything specific on that or any examples of that.
Yeah, so if you are a registered apprenticeship program in the state of Florida, and if you look at some of the older programs that have been around, there's actually a little logo, and you can go out to those companies and they will have it on their billboards, that signifies that they are a registered apprenticeship program. But I really think that we're missing a marketing opportunity by not, if you are a registered apprenticeship program, marketing that as a registered apprenticeship program. You're welcome.
Thank you.